Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is iMac Sports Another Football video, and today I'm going over my wildcard weekend power rankings for the 2022 NFL season. This is basically just a wrap-up of the season. I will be doing a preseason power rankings at the end of the Super Bowl, after the Super Bowl, but this is based off of how each team played the season. I'm going to quickly go through the teams that missed the postseason, but those would be very brief descriptions before I get to the teams that made the postseason. Sorry about the lighting. I am in my basement this week, and again, the light for my lamp, the cord doesn't reach to the wall, so I can't really put it in the best spot. So let's get right into it. First off, the dumpster fire at 32 with the Bears, at 31 with the Cardinals, and at 30 we have the Colts. All three of these teams started off okay. Cardinals started off 4-6, Colts started off 3-1, and the Bears started off, I believe, 3-6 or 3-5 or something. They all pretty much lost out for the most part. The Colts got one extra win, and they've been the worst teams in the league for the majority of the season. Houston has actually looked okay the last few weeks. They got a couple of wins. They played some good teams really well, but they're still very clearly in the dumpster fire with the second worst record in the league. Fell off plus Denver. We have the Jets, the Falcons, the Rams, and the Titans. The Jets and the Titans both started 7-3. They both finished 7-10. The Jets were the worst team in the league, in my opinion, for the second half for the last 7 games of the season. They were worse than the Titans. They were worse than the Cardinals. They were worse than the Bears. Their offense was so bad, especially the last few weeks, particularly. They beat Buffalo, which was impressive, and then they just died. And I don't know what their quarterback situation for next year. I will have them high on my preseason power rankings, but for the wrap-up power rankings for the season, they're really bad. Atlanta had some promise at the beginning of the year, and then they fell off, and then they still fought in every single game. They had a lot of one-score games. They had a lot of close games. They looked like they could have won some games, but it just didn't work out a lot of the time. The Broncos and the Rams have been together pretty much the whole season. They both started off at the top. They slowly made their way down. The Broncos made their way down a little bit faster. Then they were at the bottom together. Then they've just kind of been hovering around the bottom area for most of the season. The Rams have the edge because they did beat the Broncos head-to-head 51-14. I think that does give them the advantage. So I have the Rams at 25 and the Broncos at 26. And the Titans are at 24. Their fall-off wasn't as horrendously bad as the Jets, although they did also lose 7 games in a row. They had some close games in there. They had some competent games. But overall, they were pretty horrendous the last 7 weeks of the season. Good second half. We have the Browns, we have the Saints, we have the Panthers, and we have the Raiders. Obviously, the Panthers and Raiders had better second halves than the Saints and the Browns, but they all were around the same. All these teams finished with 6 or 7 wins. They all had really weird starts to the season. The Saints had a lot of injuries after the week 1. They had a lot of injuries. The Browns obviously didn't have Deshaun Watson. He came back, and he wasn't great initially. And he didn't even win this week, but he had some good games, and the team did pretty well down the stretch. The Raiders did pretty well down the stretch, although they didn't win as many games as they could have. Their offense looked good, and they did win a couple games, and they had some good games against good teams such as Kansas City or the Niners. And Carolina has looked mediocre pretty much the whole year. Moving on, we have the teams that did not make the playoffs, but were very close. We have Washington at 19, we have the Packers at 18, we have the Steelers at 17, Patriots at 16, and Lions at 15. This category could also be broken up to the Lions at 15 and then everyone else at 16. The Lions, I believe, are clearly the strongest team out of these teams. They should be in the playoffs over Seattle. I think that the Lions have a better team than Seattle. I think that they should be in the playoffs over Seattle. I'm very upset that the Lions are not in the playoffs, and I'm very sad the Rams won that game. That being said, the Lions are not in the playoffs at 9-8. I'm upset about that. I'm also upset the Patriots are not in the playoffs, but that's a different story. The Patriots, the Steelers, the Packers, and Washington. All of them started off poorly in their own respect. The Packers started off 3-1, and then they dive-bombed. The Steelers started off 2-6. They just started off bad. Washington started off bad with Carson Wentz before Taylor Heinicke came in, and then the Patriots started off 1-3 before they started to pick up the pace. Overall, all of these teams have had some really strong games against really good teams, and they've had some really bad games against really bad teams as well. That being said, the reason why I have the Patriots 16 is because I believe that the Patriots have the most talented team out of the 4 teams below the Lions. I think that the major issue with the Patriots this season was their coaching staff. The major issue was play calling. Major issue was special teams. And one play in random games cost us a lot of games. The Steelers had the best second half of the season for all of these teams. They obviously can't clawed back from 2-6 to 9-8 to get a winning record. They had a somewhat easy schedule, but they did win some tough games. And they got a couple breaks against teams like Ravens when they didn't have Lamar. But obviously, they played a very strong second half of the season to finish 9-8. Packers, they lost this week to the Lions to secure their playoff miss. Overall, their season, they did turn it around a little bit, but it just wasn't enough with their start. And Washington could have made the playoffs, but for some reason, they decided to start Carson Wentz in Week 17. They won this week, but they didn't start Carson Wentz in Week 17, which is what lost them their playoff spot. Next up, we have somehow they made it. At 14, we have the Dolphins. At 13, we have the Seahawks. At 12, we have the Giants. And at 11, we have the Jaguars. The Jaguars are really the only team that don't really belong in this category. Much like the last one, it's just the Jaguars and then everyone else. Most of that has to do with the fact that the Jaguars, much like the Steelers, had a very strong second half of the season. I believe they started 3-7 and they finished 9-8. So they're 6-1 in their last 7 games, as opposed to Tennessee, who's 0-7. The Jaguars have beaten some very strong teams this season as well, including the Chargers in a demolition of a game, 38-10. They also beat the Cowboys 40-34. They've had a lot of very impressive games. The only reason why they're not in the top 10 is because obviously they have a second-year quarterback who's in his first playoffs ever, and I believe that Tom Brady gets a little bit more credit than Trevor Lawrence, although I do believe that the Jaguars have a very legitimate chance to win a game or two in the playoffs. The Giants are above Seattle simply because they've been a little bit more consistent. Seattle kind of looked like Tennessee for a few games in a row. They lost, I believe, 4 or 5 in a row before they righted the ship. Geno Smith has not looked the same the last 4 or 5 weeks, but they have won a couple of games in that stretch, and although he hasn't looked the same, they have been able to win enough games to make the playoffs. Markedly the game last week against the Jets, and then the game this week against the Rams. Both of those teams are not great teams, but they were able to get the victory. As for Miami, they obviously also beat the Jets this week 11-6 to make the playoffs. But they're the lowest in the category because they have obviously lost 6 games in a row leading up to this win over the Jets. And we don't even know if Tua is playing. Tua has been injured, and Skylar Thompson, whoever else, has been in the lineup. Whether or not Tua plays, I think the Dolphins will be losing to Buffalo. But you never know. They could win. They could somehow win, especially if Tua plays, because if Tua comes back from the concussion injury and he looks like Tua again, then the Dolphins have a legitimate chance. Moving on to the top 10, we have the strong contenders. We have Tampa at 10, we have the Chargers at 9, we have the Ravens at 8, Vikings at 7, and the Cowboys at 6. Tampa got out of the bottom category simply because of Tom Brady. They're 8-9, but they would have won against the Falcons had Brady played the whole game, which would have put them on par with 3 other teams in the tier below them, and the Giants finished 9-7-1. So someone needs to be in the top 10, and I'm going to give Brady that edge. I could have put them higher, but simply out of merit of Tom Brady, but they just haven't played as good as the other teams for the majority of the season. The Chargers have been inconsistent, in my opinion, although a lot of that has to do with injuries. One of the biggest issues I see with them going to the playoffs is whether or not Mike Williams can play. Mike Williams is a major part of their offense, and one of the main reasons why they've been inconsistent is because they've had a lot of offensive injuries. If Mike Williams is unable to go, that'll be another hole in their offense that they'll need to deal with in the playoffs, and that might be a big issue, especially playing against some of the better teams in the AFC. The Ravens, again, another major issue with them. Is Lamar going to be healthy, and will he play at his best? This is why I almost put Tampa at 8. Because the Ravens and the Chargers do have question marks, and they have been almost as inconsistent as Tampa is. Again, obviously the Ravens have had an injured quarterback for the lot of the season, and Lamar was 7-3. But you never know what he's going to look like when he comes back. You never know if he's going to come back for the very first week of the playoffs against the Bengals. There's a lot up in the air, and I think that it's going to be big if he plays. And if he doesn't play, then I just don't see them having a chance. I have the Vikings at 7, and I have the Cowboys at 6. Minnesota dropped down out of the elite last week. The Cowboys dropped down out of the elite this week. Obviously, this week didn't mean much for the Cowboys because the Eagles did win their game. But for half of the game, this game did mean something for the Cowboys because the Giants obviously weren't out. And the Cowboys could have won the division, and they were fighting for their division in case the Eagles lost. And they looked horrible. They looked so bad against Washington. And Washington had, I can't even remember the guy's name, something Scott or something, as their quarterback. And their defense couldn't do any, or their defense wasn't phenomenal, and their offense looked pretty bad. They did a little bit better in the second half, but it wasn't anything to write home about. And the Cowboys just have been a lot less consistent than the rest of the elite in the second half of the season. They had a very strong first half of the season. Their second half of the season was a little bit more inconsistent. And I think that Dak Prescott's turnovers has been a big part of the inconsistency of the Cowboys. That's the reason why they are not in the elite category going into the postseason. I do believe that they have the chance to win the Super Bowl, and they do have a chance to be an elite team. And I think that they do have the best chance to win the Super Bowl out of the 5 teams here. That being said, most of that has to do with the fact that the Vikings are even more inconsistent, and the fact that the Buccaneers obviously are 8 and 9. If the Buccaneers weren't 8 and 9, I'd be taking them over Dallas, and if the Vikings didn't lose by 50 in 2 random games of the season, I'd have the Vikings over Dallas. But right now, Dallas sits at number 6. I think it's a pretty fair ranking, and I think that they do have a good chance to do well this year. But inconsistency down the stretch has been the reason why they dropped out of the elite. In the NFL's elite, we have the 49ers at 5, we have the Bengals at 4, we have the Eagles at 3, we have the Bills at 2, and we have the Chiefs at 1. A lot of you might be saying, oh, you've had the Eagles and the Niners at 1 and 2 for the last 6 weeks in a row, and they both won this week. Why are they at 3 and 5? This video is different than the rest of my Power Rankings videos. A lot of teams have moved around this week because I'm addressing the whole season. I'm addressing mostly the second half of the season. I'm addressing mostly how these teams are currently playing and how they're going to be playing in the playoffs. Jalen Hurts has been injured for 2 weeks, and this week he came back. He didn't look great. He didn't look like himself. They obviously won the game against the Giants, which is a formidable opponent, but the Giants weren't playing all their starters. They didn't even have Daniel Jones in. So it wasn't really the most impressive one in the world, especially considering it was a 1-score victory. And again, much like Lamar, Jalen Hurts' injury is going to be a question mark in the playoffs. Same with Tom Brady. Patrick Mahomes does get seniority status. He does get additional bonuses for being Patrick Mahomes. He's made it to 2 Super Bowls. He's won a Super Bowl. He's made it to 5 AFC Championship games. 4 AFC Championship games, sorry. And because of that, obviously, Kansas City is number 1 in the power rankings. I think that between the Chiefs, the Bills, and the Eagles, the surrounding team around the quarterback is very similar. I'd give the edge to Buffalo, 2nd Eagles, 3rd Chiefs. But I think that Patrick Mahomes makes up the difference to bring them to the 1 spot. The number 2 spot, obviously, Buffalo. They've done phenomenal all season. They started off strong. They finished strong. They had a couple of weird games in the middle. Obviously, the loss to the Vikings was weird with the safety and everything. So yeah, some odd games in there. Sorry, not the safety, the fumble recovery for a touchdown. So some odd games in there, but yeah. The Bengals are at 4, which is where they have been. And the 49ers are at 5, solely because of Brock Purdy. He's played phenomenally, don't get me wrong. But first-year quarterbacks don't always do phenomenal in the playoffs. And generally speaking, no first-year quarterbacks ever made the Super Bowl. Very few have ever even made the conference championship game. The Niners are, I think, the best team out of the 5 teams here, but the quarterback obviously is the big difference. Joe Burrow's made a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes has made a Super Bowl. Josh Allen's made an AFC Championship game, and Jalen Hurts is an MVP candidate. Brock Purdy just doesn't fit. That's why the Niners are at 5. But again, for the majority of the season, I had the Niners at number 2. It's just because the playoffs are turning that I have brought them down to 5. But I think that all 5 of these teams have almost a dead equal chance to win the Super Bowl. I think it's pretty close between all of them. They're all very strong. And these are the elite teams in the NFL, in my opinion. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. And I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace.